The rain hammered against the windows of the Golden Oak restaurant as James Mitchell wiped down his 20th table of the evening. His white shirt stuck to his back with sweat, and his feet ached in the worn black shoes he couldn't afford to replace. The dinner rush had been particularly brutal tonight, with every table filled and customers growing impatient as the kitchen struggled to keep up with orders. James had been working at the Golden Oak for 3 years now, ever since he dropped out of university when his father fell ill. The family's small flat in East London barely accommodated his parents and younger sister, and every penny he earned went toward rent, medical bills, and keeping food on the table. At 25, he often wondered if this was all life had to offer him, but he pushed those thoughts aside. His family needed him, and that was enough. "Table 7 is getting restless," called Sarah, another server, as she rushed past carrying a tray of steaming plates. "They've been waiting 45 minutes for their main course." James nodded and made his way over to the frustrated couple, apologizing profusely and offering complimentary desserts. This had become routine: smooth over angry customers, make promises he hoped the kitchen could keep, and somehow maintain a smile through it all. The manager, Mr. Hartwell, was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in his office counting money while his staff dealt with the chaos. As James turned from table 7, he noticed an elderly man being wheeled into the restaurant by what appeared to be a care assistant. The man was clearly disabled, his hands shaking with what James recognized as Parkinson's disease. His clothes were expensive but practical, and despite his physical limitations, his eyes held a sharp intelligence that caught James's attention. The hostess, looking overwhelmed and slightly annoyed, led them to a table near the back of the restaurant. James watched as she practically dumped the menus on the table and hurried away without a second glance. The care assistant looked around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the bustling atmosphere and less than welcoming reception. James felt a familiar tug in his chest. His grandfather had suffered from a similar condition before he passed away 2 years ago. He remembered how difficult simple tasks like eating had become, and how embarrassed his grandfather felt when his hands wouldn't cooperate. Without thinking, James abandoned his section and walked over to the elderly gentleman's table. "Good evening, sir," James said warmly, crouching down slightly to be at eye level with the man in the wheelchair. "I'm James, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Is this your first time dining with us?" The elderly man looked surprised at the genuine attention. His voice, though shaky, carried the refined tones of someone well-educated. "Yes, it is. I'm Robert Fairweather. This is my care assistant, Margaret." Margaret smiled gratefully at James. "Mr. Fairweather wanted to try somewhere new tonight, but I'm worried this place might be too busy for him." "Nonsense," James said firmly, pulling out his notepad. "We're here to make sure you have a wonderful evening. Mr. Fairweather, what kind of food do you enjoy? I can recommend some of our dishes that might be easier to manage, or if you prefer, I can suggest items that I could help you with if needed." Robert's eyes widened slightly. In all his dining experiences since his diagnosis, no server had ever been so direct and helpful about his condition. Most either ignored his difficulties or treated him like a child. This young man spoke to him with respect while acknowledging his needs without making a big deal of them. "I used to love fish and chips," Robert admitted with a slight smile. "But it's been quite difficult to manage lately." "I understand completely," James said. "Our chef does an excellent pan-fried sole that's very tender, and I could have him prepare it in smaller pieces. We also have wonderful mashed potatoes instead of chips, much easier to handle. Would you like me to bring you some tea while you decide? I notice your hands are a bit shaky. I could set up a cup with a straw if that would help." Margaret looked amazed. That would be wonderful. Most places don't think of these things. As James walked away to get their tea, he overheard other servers complaining about the difficult table and how it was slowing down service. He felt a flash of anger but said nothing. Instead, he focused on making sure Robert's tea was the perfect temperature and finding the best straw from the bar supplies. When he returned, James noticed that Robert was struggling to read the menu. Without being asked, James sat down in the chair across from them. "Would you like me to go through the menu with you? I can describe each dish and let you know which ones might work best." For the next 10 minutes, James patiently explained each menu item, describing textures, temperatures, and how they might be modified to suit Robert's needs. He spoke naturally, never talking down to Robert or making him feel like a burden. Margaret watched in amazement as her usually reserved client began to relax and even laugh at James's gentle humor about some of the more pretentious menu descriptions. Other tables were waiting, and James could see Mr. Hartwell emerging from his office with an annoyed expression, but he didn't care. This man deserved to enjoy his meal with dignity, and James was going to make sure that happened. "I think I'll have that sole you mentioned," Robert said finally, "and perhaps some of those mashed potatoes. But James, I should warn you, I'm quite messy when I eat. My hands don't always cooperate." "Mr. Fairweather," James said seriously, "my grandfather had Parkinson's too. He taught me that dignity isn't about being perfect, it's about being treated with respect regardless. I'll check on you throughout the meal, and if you need any help, just let me know. There's no shame in accepting assistance when it's offered with kindness." Robert's eyes filled with tears, and Margaret had to look away to compose herself. It had been months since anyone had treated Robert like a complete person, rather than just a collection of symptoms and limitations. As James walked away to place their order, he had no idea that this simple act of human decency would set in motion a chain of events that would completely transform his life. All he knew was that he wanted this kind gentleman to have a pleasant evening, just as he would want for his own grandfather. The kitchen was still backed up, but James made sure to expedite Robert's order and check on him regularly, always with a warm smile and genuine concern. Little did he know that Robert Fairweather was watching his every move with growing admiration and forming ideas that would soon change everything. 20 minutes later, James emerged from the kitchen carrying Robert's meal himself, rather than letting another server deliver it. He had specifically asked the chef to plate everything carefully, with the sole cut into manageable pieces and the mashed potatoes shaped in a way that would be easier to scoop. He had even requested an extra napkin and a small bowl of warm water with lemon for Robert to clean his hands if needed. "Here we are, Mr. Fairweather," James said, setting the plate down carefully. He had also brought a specially weighted fork and spoon that he had borrowed from the restaurant's collection of adaptive utensils, something most staff didn't even know existed. "I spoke with our chef, and he was happy to prepare everything, just as we discussed." Robert looked at the thoughtful presentation and felt his throat tighten with emotion. The food looked appetizing and dignified, not like invalid food. Margaret squeezed his shoulder encouragingly. "This looks wonderful. James, thank you for taking such care." James pulled up a chair nearby. "I hope you don't mind if I sit for just a moment while you start your meal. I want to make sure everything is to your liking, and frankly, my feet could use a brief rest." What followed was one of the most remarkable conversations James had experienced in years. As Robert carefully ate his meal, occasionally accepting James's discreet help when his hands trembled too much, they talked about everything from Robert's career to James's dreams of returning to university someday. Robert, it turned out, had been a successful businessman before his diagnosis. He had built several companies from the ground up and had always prided himself on recognizing talent and character in people, but his condition had gradually isolated him from the business world he once dominated. Many former colleagues now treated him as if his mind had deteriorated along with his motor skills. "You know, James," Robert said, pausing between careful bites, "in my 40 years of business, I learned that true character is revealed not in boardrooms or during success, but in small moments like these. How someone treats a person who can offer them nothing in return tells you everything about who they really are." James felt uncomfortable with the praise. "Mr. Fairweather, I'm just doing what anyone should do. My grandfather always said that. We're all just temporarily able-bodied. Life has a way of humbling everyone eventually. But that's exactly what I mean," Robert continued, his voice growing stronger with passion. "Most people don't see it that way. They see disability as something foreign, something to be afraid of or to pity. You see it as part of the human experience." Margaret watched the interaction with fascination. In the 6 months she had been caring for Robert, she had never seen him so animated or engaged. Usually, restaurant visits were ordeal to be endured, with Robert becoming increasingly withdrawn as other diners stared or servers treated him impatiently. As Robert struggled with a particularly difficult piece of fish, James noticed immediately and stood up. "Would you like me to help with that?" "Yes, please," Robert said without embarrassment, having learned to trust James completely in just one evening. James cut the fish into smaller pieces with the same casual ease he might help a child, never making Robert feel infantilized or ashamed. Other diners occasionally glanced over, but James's natural, respectful demeanor made it clear that this was simply one person helping another. Nothing more or less. "Tell me about these dreams of returning to university," Robert said once he could manage his food again. "What did you study?" James's face lit up despite his exhaustion. "Business and economics. I had 2 years left when Dad got sick. I always dreamed of starting my own company someday, maybe something that helps other working-class families build better lives. But that seems pretty unrealistic now." "Why unrealistic?" "Well, I can barely keep up with our current bills. University fees, living expenses. It's impossible. And even if I could somehow manage it, starting a business requires capital I'll never have." Robert listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about James's business ideas and educational background. He was impressed not just by James's kindness, but by his intelligence and insight into economic issues affecting ordinary families. This young man had the rare combination of genuine compassion and sharp business acumen that Robert had spent decades trying to find in potential partners and employees. "James," Margaret interjected during a pause in conversation, "I think you're being too modest. Mr. Fairweather here has an eye for talent. He didn't become successful by accident." Robert nodded enthusiastically. "Margaret's right. In my experience, the most successful businesses are built by people who genuinely care about solving problems for others, not just making money. Your ideas about helping working families, that's not unrealistic. That's exactly what the world needs." James felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the restaurant's stuffiness. When was the last time someone had taken his dreams seriously? His family loved him but were too worried about immediate survival to think about future possibilities. His coworkers were mostly just trying to get through each shift. But this distinguished stranger was listening to him as if his ideas actually mattered. The evening crowd was beginning to thin out, but James found himself reluctant for this conversation to end. Robert had finished most of his meal with James's patient assistance, and Margaret was gathering their belongings to leave. "James," Robert said as he prepared to go, "I want you to know that tonight has meant more to me than you could possibly understand. I haven't felt this normal in months. You've given me a gift. You've given me something too, Mr. Fairweather. It's been wonderful talking with someone who takes ideas seriously." Robert reached into his jacket pocket with shaking hands and pulled out an elegant business card. "This is my personal card. I want you to call me tomorrow if you're willing. I have a proposition that might interest you." James took the card, noting the expensive paper and understated design. "Robert Fairweather," it read, with just a phone number below. No company name or title, which somehow made it seem even more impressive. "I'm not sure what I could possibly offer you, sir, but I'll definitely call." "Just promise me you'll actually call," Robert said seriously. "Sometimes opportunity comes in unexpected packages, James. The question is whether we're brave enough to answer when it knocks." As Margaret wheeled Robert toward the door, he turned back one final time. "And James, thank you for treating me like a person tonight, not a patient or a charity case. That's rarer than you might think." James watched them leave, still holding the business card and feeling like something fundamental had just shifted in his world. He had no idea what Robert's proposition might be, but for the first time in years, he felt a spark of genuine hope about his future. James stared at Robert's business card for the 10th time that morning, turning it over in his hands as he sat on the edge of his narrow bed. His shift didn't start for 3 hours, but he hadn't been able to sleep. The conversation from the previous evening kept replaying in his mind, filling him with an unfamiliar mixture of excitement and anxiety. His sister Emma knocked on his bedroom door. "James, Mum says breakfast is ready." "Coming," he called back, slipping the card into his wallet. At the kitchen table, his family was already gathered around their usual breakfast of toast and tea. His father, looking frailer than ever, was reading yesterday's newspaper while his mother bustled about trying to make their meager provisions stretch. "You were quiet when you came home last night," his mother, Helen, observed. "Rough shift?" James hesitated. How could he explain what had happened without raising false hopes? His family had been disappointed too many times before. "Actually, it was interesting. I met this gentleman, an older man with Parkinson's. We had a really good conversation." "That's nice, dear," Helen said absently, more focused on calculating whether they had enough milk to last until payday. His father, David, looked up from his paper. "Parkinson's, eh? Tough disease. Was he managing all right?" "He was struggling a bit, but he's got a good care assistant. Really smart man, though. Used to run his own businesses." Emma, who was 17 and preparing for her A-levels, perked up with interest. "What kind of businesses?" "I'm not sure exactly. He gave me his card and asked me to call him today. Said he had some kind of proposition." The kitchen fell silent. David slowly folded his newspaper and Helen stopped her bustling. In their family's experience, propositions from strangers rarely led to anything good. "James," his father said carefully, "you need to be careful about these things. Sometimes people prey on folks in our situation, promising big opportunities that never materialize." "Or worse," Helen added, her protective instincts flaring. "Could be some kind of scam. Why would a successful businessman be interested in a waiter he just met?" James felt his enthusiasm deflating. "Maybe you're right. It probably wasn't as meaningful as I thought." But Emma, ever the optimist, grabbed his arm. "Or maybe it was exactly as meaningful as you thought. James, you've always been brilliant with people. Remember how you helped Mrs. Patterson next door when she was having trouble with her landlord? You figured out her rights and helped her negotiate a fair rent increase. And what about when you organized that fundraiser for the Thompson family, when their dad lost his job? That's different, Em. That was just helping neighbors. No, it's not different. You see problems and you solve them, and you do it in a way that makes people feel respected and capable. Maybe this man saw something in you that we've all been too worried about money to notice." David and Helen exchanged glances. Emma had always been the dreamer in the family, but she also had good instincts about people. After breakfast, James walked to the local park, needing space to think clearly. The morning air was crisp, and the autumn leaves crunched under his feet as he found a quiet bench. He pulled out his phone and Robert's card, taking a deep breath before dialing. The phone rang twice before a crisp female voice answered. "Mr. Fairweather's residence, this is Margaret speaking." "Hello, Margaret, this is James Mitchell from the Golden Oak restaurant. Mr. Fairweather asked me to call him today." "James. He's been waiting for your call. He's having his morning therapy session, but he specifically told me to interrupt him if you rang. Just one moment, please." James's heart began beating faster. The fact that Robert had told his care assistant to expect the call made it feel more real, more serious. "James, my boy." Robert's voice came through clearly, warmer and stronger than it had sounded in the noisy restaurant. "I was beginning to worry you might have thought our conversation was just the rambling of an old man." "Not at all, Mr. Fairweather. I've been thinking about what you said all night. You mentioned a proposition?" "Indeed I did. James, I've been retired from active business for 2 years now, since my diagnosis became too limiting. But I've been watching the market, staying informed, and I've been waiting for the right opportunity and the right person. I believe you might be both." James gripped the phone tighter. "I'm not sure I understand. Let me be direct. I've built and sold 3 companies in my lifetime, each one more successful than the last. I know how to spot talent, and more importantly, I know how to spot character. Last night I saw both in abundance." Robert paused, and James could hear him taking a careful sip of something, probably tea. "I want to offer you a partnership, James. I have capital, experience, and connections. You have vision, integrity, and something I've lost over the years. Direct connection to the problems ordinary families face every day. Together we could build something meaningful." James felt dizzy. Mr. Fairweather, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm just a waiter. I don't have any qualifications or— Stop right there, Robert interrupted firmly. Do you know what my first business degree was worth when I started my first company? Nothing. Do you know what made the difference? The ability to see what people needed and the determination to provide it ethically and effectively. You demonstrated both of those qualities in spades last night. But what kind of business are you thinking about? Robert's voice grew excited. That's the beautiful part. I'm not thinking about anything specific. I want to hear your ideas. You mentioned wanting to help working families build better lives. What would that look like? What problems do you see that nobody else is addressing? James found himself talking, the words tumbling out as months of suppressed dreams suddenly found voice. He talked about the struggles his family faced, about how difficult it was for working-class people to access financial advice, about the gap between entry-level jobs and careers that provided real security. He talked about his father's illness and how it had revealed the fragility of their entire economic situation. Brilliant, Robert murmured periodically. Yes, exactly. Keep going. For 45 minutes, James found himself sketching out ideas he had never dared voice before. Services that could help families navigate benefit systems, micro-lending programs for education and training, employment agencies that actually invested in long-term career development rather than just placing people in temporary jobs. James, Robert said when he finally paused for breath, I want to meet with you properly. Not at the restaurant, but at my home where we can spread out some papers and really explore these ideas. Are you free this Sunday? Yes, I think so. But Mr. Fairweather, I need you to know that I don't have any money to invest. If you're looking for a business partner who can contribute capital— My boy, Robert chuckled. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. What I don't have is time, energy, or the perspective of someone who's lived the problems we want to solve. Your contribution would be far more valuable than money. After they ended the call with plans to meet Sunday afternoon, James sat on the park bench in stunned silence. Was this really happening? Could his life actually be about to change so dramatically? He thought about his family's warnings, about the possibility that this was all too good to be true. But something deep inside him, the same instinct that had drawn him to help Robert in the first place, told him this was real. Sometimes kindness really did create opportunities. Sometimes treating people with dignity really did matter in ways you couldn't predict. For the first time in 3 years, James allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the restaurant, beyond scraping by paycheck to paycheck. Maybe, just maybe, his life was about to begin. Sunday afternoon found James standing outside an elegant Georgian townhouse in Kensington, checking the address on Robert's card for the 3rd time. The building was imposing but not ostentatious, with well-maintained stonework and pristine windows that spoke of understated wealth. James adjusted his tie nervously, the only decent one he owned, borrowed from his father's wardrobe. Margaret answered the door with a warm smile. James, wonderful to see you again. Mr. Fairweather has been looking forward to this all weekend. Come in, please. The interior of the house was tastefully decorated with antique furniture and original artwork, but what struck James most was how lived in it felt. This wasn't a showplace but a real home, with books scattered on side tables, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table, and family photographs on the mantelpiece. Robert is in his study, Margaret explained as she led James down a hallway lined with bookshelves. He's had the cleaning lady prepare tea and sandwiches, and he's been organizing papers all morning. I haven't seen him this energetic in months. The study was a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a small garden. Robert sat behind a large mahogany desk, surrounded by neat piles of documents, his laptop open despite the obvious difficulty he had typing. He looked up as James entered, his face breaking into a genuine smile. James, perfect timing. I've been doing some research since our phone call, and I think you'll be interested in what I've discovered. James took the offered chair across from Robert, accepting a cup of tea from Margaret before she discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind her. Mr. Fairweather, I have to admit I'm a bit overwhelmed by all this. Your home, your obvious success, I'm not sure what I could possibly bring to a partnership with someone at your level. Robert leaned forward, his eyes intense despite the tremor in his hands. James, let me tell you something about success. I've made a lot of money in my life, built companies that employed hundreds of people, lived in beautiful homes like this one. But do you know what I remember most clearly from my business career? The failures. The times I ignored my instincts about people's character, the times I chose profit over principle, the opportunities I missed because I was too focused on conventional markers of success. He gestured to a photograph on his desk showing himself with a much younger woman and 2 children. My daughter Sarah works in sustainable energy now, building affordable housing projects. My son Michael is a teacher in East London. They could have taken comfortable positions in my companies, but they chose work that makes a real difference in people's lives. They taught me something important about what success actually means. James studied the photograph, noting the pride in Robert's expression. They sound like remarkable people. They are, and they both reminded me after my diagnosis that the most meaningful work I ever did was when I helped people solve real problems, not when I was just accumulating wealth. That's why last night mattered so much to me, James. You didn't help me because you thought I could do something for you. You had no idea who I was. You helped me because it was the right thing to do. Robert opened his laptop carefully, his fingers moving slowly across the keyboard. Now, let me show you what I've been researching. These ideas you shared about helping working families, there's a massive gap in the market. For the next 2 hours, Robert walked James through detailed market research, demographic studies, and financial projections. He had identified specific areas where existing services failed to meet the needs of working-class families, and had even begun outlining potential business models. Look at this, Robert said, pointing to a chart on his screen. There are over 2 million families in the UK caught in what economists call the working poor trap. They earn too much to qualify for certain benefits, but not enough to build real financial security. Most financial services ignore them completely because they don't have enough capital to be profitable clients. James leaned forward, studying the data. His mind began racing as he saw his family's struggles reflected in the statistics. But what if you approached it differently? What if instead of trying to maximize profit from each client, you focused on volume and long-term relationships? Exactly. Robert's enthusiasm was infectious. Traditional financial services want clients who can pay high fees immediately. But what if we created services that grew with families as they built stability? Start with basic financial literacy and benefits navigation, then gradually add savings programs, educational loans, career development support. James found himself sketching ideas on the notepad Robert had provided. You could even partner with employers, help them understand that investing in their workers' financial stability actually reduces turnover and increases productivity. Brilliant. Most companies spend thousands recruiting and training new employees to replace workers who leave for slightly better paying jobs. What if we could help workers advance within their current companies while helping employers retain talent? The conversation flowed naturally, each idea building on the last. James was amazed to discover that his practical experience of financial struggle combined with Robert's business expertise created insights that neither of them could have reached alone. James, Robert said eventually, I want to make you a formal proposal. I'm prepared to provide initial capital of £50,000 to develop these ideas into a real business plan. We'll spend the next 3 months researching, planning, and testing concepts. If we both feel confident about moving forward, I'll provide additional funding for a full launch. James felt his breath catch. £50,000 was more money than his family had ever seen at one time. Mr. Fairweather, that's incredibly generous, but I need you to understand my situation. I can't quit my job at the restaurant. My family depends on my income, and I don't have any business experience beyond ideas and good intentions. I wouldn't expect you to quit immediately, Robert replied. We'll start slowly, working evenings and weekends. As for business experience, that's what I'm here for. I'll teach you everything I know about business planning, financial management, marketing, legal requirements, everything you need to know. Robert opened a desk drawer and withdrew a folder containing what appeared to be legal documents. I've already had my solicitor draft a preliminary partnership agreement. You'd own 49% of the company. I'd own 51% initially. But there's a provision that transfers majority ownership to you after 2 years if certain performance benchmarks are met. James stared at the documents, hardly believing what he was hearing. Why would you give me nearly half ownership of something I'm not even funding? Because ideas and execution are worth more than money, James. I can always find more capital, but I've been looking for 2 years to find someone with your combination of insight, integrity, and connection to the problems we want to solve. Besides, Robert smiled, in 2 years, if this works the way I think it will, your half will be worth considerably more than the money I'm investing. James thought about his family, about his father's illness, about Emma's dreams of university, about his mother's constant worry about money. This opportunity could change everything for them, but it could also be a disaster if things went wrong. Mr. Fairweather, can I have some time to think about this? Maybe discuss it with my family? Of course, Robert said. This is a big decision, and it should be made carefully. Take all the time you need. But James, let me leave you with this thought. Regret for chances not taken lasts much longer than regret for risks that don't work out. As Margaret prepared to drive James home, Robert shook his hand warmly. Whatever you decide, James, thank you for treating an old man with kindness when he needed it most. That meant more to me than you'll ever know. During the drive back to East London, James stared out the window at the changing neighborhoods, his mind spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. His life stood at a crossroads, and the next few days would determine which path he would take. The next 3 days passed in a blur of internal conflict for James. He carried the partnership documents in his backpack everywhere, pulling them out during quiet moments at work to read through the detailed terms again and again. The legal language was complex, but the basic structure was clear. Robert was offering him an opportunity that could transform not just his life, but his entire family's future. At home, the discussions were intense and sometimes heated. David remained skeptical, his years of disappointment making him wary of anything that seemed too good to be true. Son, I've seen plenty of working-class lads get taken advantage of by smooth-talking businessmen. What if this is some kind of elaborate con? Helen was more supportive, but equally worried. What if it doesn't work out, James? You'd be giving up the security of your restaurant job for something completely uncertain. At least we know the Golden Oak pays regularly. Emma, however, was unequivocally enthusiastic. James, this is your chance. You've been brilliant at solving problems your whole life. Remember when you figured out how to get Dad's benefits sorted when the council kept giving us the runaround? Or when you negotiated with our landlord to fix the heating without raising our rent? This is just the same. Skills on a bigger scale. The internal debate was exhausting. James found himself making pro and con lists, then tearing them up in frustration. The logical part of his mind cataloged all the ways this could go wrong, while another part whispered about the ways it could go right. On Wednesday evening, James was finishing his shift at the Golden Oak when Sarah, his fellow server, approached him. You've been distracted all week. Everything all right? James hesitated, then found himself telling her about Robert and the business opportunity. Sarah listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. James, she said when he finished, I've watched you work here for 3 years. You're the only person who actually cares about the customers, not just the tips. You help the kitchen staff when they're overwhelmed. You cover shifts for people when they're sick, and you somehow manage to keep smiling even when Mr. Hartwell is being a complete nightmare. She paused to check on one of her tables, then returned. But more than that, you see solutions where other people just see problems. When Mrs. Chen comes in with her elderly mother who has dementia, you always remember exactly how she likes her tea prepared, and you talk to her like she's still a complete person. When that homeless man came in last month and everyone wanted to call security, you bought him a meal and helped him find information about local shelters. That's just basic human decency, Sarah. No, it's not. It's leadership, James. It's seeing people's needs and finding practical ways to meet them. That's exactly what successful businesses do. That conversation stayed with James as he walked home through the familiar streets of East London. He noticed details he had previously overlooked: the payday loan shops on every corner, the job centers with long queues of discouraged-looking people, the betting shops that seemed to multiply like weeds in neighborhoods where people had little hope of improving their circumstances. These were the problems Robert wanted him to help solve. These were the people who could benefit from the kind of services they had discussed. For the first time, James began to see his background not as a limitation, but as a crucial qualification. Thursday morning, James called in sick to work, the first time he had done so in over a year. Instead of going to the restaurant, he took the tube to Kensington and rang Robert's doorbell. Margaret answered, looking surprised. "James, we weren't expecting you. Is everything all right?" "I need to talk to Mr. Fairweather if he's available. I've made my decision." Robert was in his garden, carefully tending to some late-blooming roses despite his shaking hands. He looked up as James approached, his expression hopeful but cautious. "I've been thinking about what you said," James began without preamble. "About regret for chances not taken lasting longer than regret for risks that don't work out." Robert set down his gardening shears carefully. "And what conclusion have you reached?" "I want to..." 2 years later, James stood in the main conference room of Fairweather Mitchell Community Services, looking out at the team of 12 employees who had joined their growing company. The converted office space in Robert's house had long since become inadequate, and they had moved to a modest but professional building in South London, strategically located to serve the communities they aimed to help. Sarah Fairweather Chen, now the company's Director of Community Outreach, was presenting their quarterly impact report to the board. "We've now helped over 800 families navigate benefit systems, assisted 340 people in securing career development loans, and our partnership program has placed 156 workers in companies committed to long-term employee advancement." James felt a familiar surge of pride mixed with disbelief. The numbers were impressive, but behind each statistic was a real person whose life had improved in some meaningful way. Like Mrs. Rodriguez, who had used their micro-lending service to pay for nursing assistant training and now earned twice her previous wage, or Tommy Singh, who had accessed benefits for his disabled daughter that he never knew existed, freeing up money for his family to move to better housing. Robert, now serving as chairman emeritus, had adapted remarkably well to his role as mentor and advisor rather than day-to-day operator. His condition had progressed, making detailed work more difficult, but his strategic thinking remained sharp. He watched the presentation with obvious satisfaction, occasionally catching James's eye with an approving nod. "The most significant development this quarter," Sarah continued, "has been the interest from other organizations wanting to replicate our model. We've had inquiries from community groups in Manchester, Birmingham, and Glasgow about licensing our approach." Michael Fairweather, who had joined the company 6 months earlier as Director of Education Partnerships, raised his hand. "The Glasgow inquiry is particularly interesting because they're dealing with many of the same issues we see here, but in a different economic context. It could be a perfect test case for scaling our model." James marveled at how naturally he had adapted to these boardroom discussions. 2 years ago, he would have been intimidated by the business terminology and strategic planning processes. Now, while he still felt like he was learning constantly, he had gained confidence in his ability to contribute meaningfully to these conversations. "Before we discuss expansion," James interjected, "I want to make sure we're maintaining our core mission. I've been visiting some of our partner companies lately, and I'm concerned that a few of them are starting to treat our career development program like a recruitment service rather than a genuine investment in their workers' long-term growth." Robert leaned forward with interest. "Can you give us specific examples?" James pulled out his notebook, filled with observations from his recent site visits. "Henderson Logistics, for instance. They've hired 8 people through our program, but only 2 have received the promised training opportunities. The others are still doing the same entry-level work they started with, just with slightly better pay." Sarah frowned. "That's definitely not what we agreed to. Should we consider dropping them as a partner?" "I think we should give them one more chance, but with very specific requirements and a clear timeline for improvement. Our reputation depends on delivering real results for the people we serve, not just placing them in marginally better jobs. The discussion that followed exemplified the balance James had learned to strike between idealism and pragmatism. They couldn't help people by being so rigid that partner companies dropped out, but they also couldn't compromise their mission by accepting minimal improvements as success. After the meeting, Robert asked James to stay behind for a private conversation. They sat in Robert's office, surrounded by the awards and recognition the company had received for its innovative approach to social enterprise. "James, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. The performance benchmarks we established for transferring majority ownership of the company. You've exceeded every single one of them." James felt his stomach flutter with nervous excitement. They had discussed this possibility when the company was founded, but it had seemed like such a distant prospect that he hadn't really believed it would happen. Robert pulled out a legal document from his desk drawer. "My solicitor has prepared the paperwork to transfer 51% ownership to you as promised. But before we make this official, I want to know how you feel about it." "Honestly?" "Terrified," James admitted. 2 years ago I was serving fish and chips. Now you're asking me to take majority control of a company that's helping hundreds of families and employing 12 people. And that fear," Robert said with a smile, "is exactly why you're the right person for this responsibility. Someone who wasn't afraid of that level of accountability might not take it seriously enough." James thought about his family, about how dramatically their lives had changed over the past 2 years. His father's medical expenses were no longer a source of constant stress. Emma was thriving at university, and his mother had been able to reduce her hours at the cleaning service to spend more time caring for David. "Mr. Fairweather, Robert, I want you to know that accepting this offer isn't just about business success for me. It's about proving that people from backgrounds like mine can create something meaningful, something that lasts beyond our own immediate needs." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly the perspective this company needs as it grows. James, I've learned something important from working with you. I spent 40 years in business thinking that success meant accumulating wealth and building impressive companies. But real success means creating something that makes the world better for people who need it most." 3 months later, James stood before an audience of 200 people at the National Social Enterprise Award ceremony. Fairweather Mitchell Community Services had been named Social Enterprise of the Year, and James had been asked to accept the award on behalf of the company. As he looked out at the audience, he spotted his family in the third row. David, looking healthier than he had in years, sat proudly next to Helen, who was wiping away tears of joy. Emma beamed at him from her seat, giving him an encouraging thumbs up. 2.5 years ago, James began, his voice steady and clear, I was a waiter in a busy restaurant, just trying to get through each shift and help my family pay the bills. I had dreams about starting a business someday, but they seemed completely unrealistic given our circumstances. He paused, finding Robert in the audience. His mentor and partner was listening intently despite the effort required for him to attend the ceremony. Then I met an elderly gentleman who taught me that kindness creates opportunities in ways we can never predict. By treating him with the dignity and respect every person deserves, regardless of their circumstances, I discovered that he was someone who could help me turn my dreams into reality. The audience was completely silent, absorbed in his story. But here's what I've learned. The opportunity wasn't really about meeting someone wealthy who could fund my ideas. It was about recognizing that my background, my family's struggles, my experience of financial insecurity, all of these things weren't obstacles to overcome, but qualifications that prepared me to solve problems for people in similar situations. James looked directly at the young people in the audience, many of whom had probably been told their backgrounds disqualified them from business success. If you're from a working-class family, if you've struggled with money, if you felt invisible, to the people in power, those experiences give you insights that no business school can teach. The question isn't whether you're qualified to create change. The question is whether you're brave enough to believe that your perspective matters. As the audience erupted in applause, James felt a profound sense of completion, not because his journey was over, but because he finally understood that it had truly begun. The scared young man who had served dinner to a disabled stranger had discovered something extraordinary. That treating people with genuine care and respect wasn't just the right thing to do, it was also the foundation for building a life of meaning and impact. The simple act of helping Robert Fairweather eat his meal with dignity had transformed both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. And through their partnership, they had created something that would continue, transforming lives for years to come, proving that extraordinary change often begins with the most ordinary acts of human kindness.